I'll still share with you this morning about the third awareness of the enlightened person, which is enjoying serenity and tranquility. So, how do we enjoy serenity and tranquility when we're suffering from COVID, when we're experiencing all of the other difficulties of life? Yeah. Well, Dogen said that being apart from all disturbances and dwelling alone in a quiet place is called enjoying serenity and tranquility. And then the Buddha said, if you monks seek joy and peace in the serenity and tranquility of non-doing, you should keep away from disturbances and dwell alone in a quiet place. Those who dwell in quiet places are praised and respected, both by Shakrenda, the chief of the gods, and by celestial beings. Therefore, cast away attachment to yourself and others, dwell alone in a quiet place, and contemplate the cause of suffering. Those who desire the company of other people suffer from their relationship with them, just as a tree will be broken and die when many birds roost on it. The bondage of worldly involvement will drown you in suffering, just as an old elephant drowns in the mud because he is unable to get out by himself. To liberate oneself from complicated involvements is called detachment. So these are the instructions by the Buddha and Dogen, and they sound pretty, I don't know, harsh might be a word, compared to the way we live today. But it's directed at monastic monks. But what does it mean for modern students of Zen who have families, relationships, and jobs? So let's look through it and examine the different parts of what the Buddha said. So dwelling alone is the key. So that is, if we're everything, that's aloneness. In Buddhism, when we talk about being alone, we mean that space in which we are everything. When the Buddha was enlightened, he said, above heaven and below heaven, I alone am the world-honored one. So if you look at the word alone, it means all one. And that I fills everything. If there's nothing outside of us, including the thing that we're doing, including everything, then how can there be disturbances? So through practice, we can experience this dwelling alone. So let it be here and now, otherwise wherever we go, it will be noisy. Now, non-doing is being one with whatever you do. Doing in this realm of aloneness or all oneness. In that state, the words Buddha, delusion aren't necessary. In that state, doing and non-doing aren't necessary. It's just that you're doing. If you say, I'm doing something, already it's dualistic. Already it's not this alone. So in that case, we can't talk about non-doing because we've already dipped back into dualism. So seek joy and peace in the serenity and tranquility of non-doing. This non-doing means doing something without being conscious of doing it, without being separate from the doing, being one with whatever you do. That's not doing, non-doing. So in chapter 3 of the Tao Te Ching, it says, practice non-doing and everything will fall into place. So, like we say, when you sit, just sit. And when you walk, just walk. But there's many examples, in the phenomenal world of non-doing. And it takes practice to do non-doing. For example, suppose, you're a skier. And if you get to be really good, and you've practiced for many years, you know how to ski down very steep, dangerous terrains at high speed. And you don't think about it. You just have to become one with it. Your body has to become one with the skis and with the hill, with the mountain, with the moguls. Yeah. Could be any other sport, basketball. The best basketball players make it look easy. They're non-doing. And musicians, you have to practice very hard to become a good musician. And then when you've accomplished a certain state, your fingers, your breath, caress the instrument without your even being aware of it. And you can produce wonderful sounds, and you can improvise too, because you know what you're doing. And it can extend to anything you do: woodworking, computer programming. People get lost in computer programming, Or echoes a nurse. When you're nursing people, if you really put your full attention to it, it's non-doing. One of my favorite stories I've told 100 times is about the psychiatrist who sat at the Zen Center of LA and had a very thriving practice in Los Angeles. And he said the more he meditated, the less he had to say to his patients and the better they got. That's non-doing in the sense that he was totally present with them, totally bearing witness to them. And they didn't feel judged, separated. And it allowed them, to open up into that space of peace and tranquility. So being alone means really being yourself, being serene and calm and undisturbed. So our life is all one life, and that's the alone. If we could really be all one or alone, all our difficulties and problems would not disturb us. Instead, we would become even more courageous and determined to take care of them. So when we read a sentence or hear a sentence like, dwell alone in a quiet place, does it mean to go deep into the mountains? That wouldn't always be easy to do. Rather, it's a matter of how to make ourselves calm and serene wherever we are. Can you connect with a still point within, no matter what's happening in your life? So when, I'm not sure, there might have been Baso, who a monk said, when he was sick, said, "Master, you're sick. Is there one who is not sick?" So being sick, can you connect with the one who's not sick? Doing my best. So those who dwell in quiet places are praised and respected, both by Shakrenda, chief of the gods, and by celestial beings. So that's what the Buddha said. All of the gods and goddesses in heaven are going to praise you and respect your life. There's a number of Zen stories that point out possible problems with this, actually. Ungo Doyo was a successor of Tozan, and he was practicing hard, doing zazen alone in the mountains. He used to come back to the monastery at a certain time of the day to eat, but suddenly he stopped coming, and after a number of days, he finally showed up, and Master Tozan asked him, "Where were you? What happened?" And Ungan Doyo said, "Devas, or gods, came down from heaven and offered me food, so I didn't need to come back." So Tozan scolded him. He said, "I thought your practice was even better than that. Devas brought food for you and praised your practice, but the fact that they recognized your goodness means that your practice is not quite good enough." So Tozan's rebuke is telling Ungan to not think that you've accomplished something. Yet the Buddha said, if you dwell in a quiet place, even the gods will respect your practice and encourage you. Just don't stick to that. See, if you think that you're good, right there you've already spoiled it. If you think you're enlightened, right there, you've obscured that enlightenment. If you think you're alone, you're no longer alone. If you think you're all one, you're not all one. But what about casting away attachments to yourself and others? So human relationships are crucial to a meaningful life, but they're also difficult to maintain harmony, since we're all stuck to our opinions and want others to reaffirm us. Just like Ungan and the Devas. Who doesn't want to be praised? But that can become an addiction and a cause for suffering. Maizumi Roshi, my teacher, used to always say that the Sangha treasure is the most important. So that's what our practice is to maintain harmony and to take care of others. But the causes of suffering always lie in the distinctions and discriminations we make between ourselves and others. The Buddha said, just as a tree will be broken and die when many birds roost in it. So the way to take this is not to not have relationships, but to use our practice to develop healthy patterns that create healthy relationships. And then the Buddha says to liberate oneself from complicated involvements is called detachment. This sounds to me a little negative or passive. Detachment implies indifference or aloofness. So I've been taught, and it has been my experience, that when we have an awakening in our practice, it manifests as compassion. Compassion is not detachment, but it is also not running around doing every so-called good thing we can do. We use our discerning wisdom to bear witness to each situation and each interaction to know what form compassion must take. Elie Wiesel, the Holocaust survivor and Nobel Prize laureate, wrote, "The opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. The opposite of art is not ugliness, it's indifference. The opposite of faith is not heresy, it's indifference. The opposite of life is not death, it's indifference." Always in our practice, we take all the elements of our life and use them to alleviate suffering wherever we encounter it. So the challenge is how to find peace and tranquility while totally engaging in life rather than withdrawing from life. In the Book of Equanimity, a collection of koans, case 45, there's a preface which says, "The manifest koan depends solely on the right now. The absolute manner distinguishes only itself. If you try to set up gradations or intentionally try to strive, then all of this is painting eyebrows on chaos or attaching a handle to a bowl. How is tranquility achieved?" So he's saying if we don't do it in the right way, we're just creating more chaos. So how is it achieved? And the main case says, the Sutra of Complete Awakening says, "Be at all times without deluded thoughts arising. Moreover, with regard to all deluded states of mind, do not try to extinguish them. Dwelling in the realm of delusion, do not add discriminating knowledge. And with regard to lacking knowledge, do not distinguish reality." So let's take each line and look at it a little bit and see what this sutra is saying. It's a formula for achieving tranquility. It starts, "Be at all times without deluded thoughts arising." That's what we talk about all the time here at the Zen Center. To be without deluded thoughts arising. So, whatever you're doing, don't separate yourself. Don't create something separate from you. And the second line says, "With regard to deluded thoughts, don't try to extinguish them." So when these thoughts arise, there's nothing wrong with them. Don't try to extinguish them. Don't try to push them away. Just let them be. They'll go away by themselves. And then dwelling in the realm of delusion, don't add discriminating knowledge. So in other words, don't think that these thoughts are it. And don't add interpretation to them. And the last line, with regard to lacking knowledge, do not distinguish reality. So the sutra is saying, don't get stuck anywhere. Don't argue about what's true and what's not true. Just maintain yourself in the realm of non-doing. When we chant the Heart Sutra, there's a part of it that says no suffering, no cause of suffering, no extinguishing, no path, no wisdom, and no gain. With no hindrance in the mind, no hindrance, therefore no fear. Far beyond deluded thoughts. This is nirvana. So if I were to summarize this part of the sutra, it says, not arising, not extinguishing, not knowing, not distinguishing, not getting stuck in any state. Be at all times without deluded thoughts arising. But if they do arise, don't get stuck there. Just let them be. Don't try to extinguish them. Don't try to push them away. Just let them take care of themselves. And then dwelling in this realm of delusion, in this realm of thoughts, don't add anything to it. Don't add discriminating knowledge. Don't interpret it. Don't judge. In the chant, the identity of relative and absolute, there's one line that says, do not judge by any standards. That's what we do almost all day long. How can we let it go? So, with regard to lacking knowledge, if we don't add this discriminating knowledge to it, do not distinguish reality. Don't get stuck anywhere. So these sutras that we're just talking about are primarily written in India after the death of the Buddha. This particular one, it's called the Sutra of Complete Awakening. And there's a chapter in this sutra where all the bodhisattvas are gathered together in an assembly with the Buddha, and each one of them asks the Buddha a question, and then the Buddha responds. This is actually part of the Buddha's answer to one of the questions, which was from the Bodhisattva of pure and clear wisdom. So the Bodhisattvas begged the Buddha to expound the Dharma for the sake of all beings, present and past. And they each had a question. And Manjushri Bodhisattva asked the first question. And Manjushri Bodhisattva is actually the image that is usually in the meditation halls, in the zendos. In most monasteries, there are two halls. One is the meditation hall, or zendo, and the other is the Dharma hall, where they have talks and chanting. And the Buddha is the image in the Dharma hall, but in the zendo, it's Manjushri Bodhisattva. And he's the Bodhisattva of wisdom. And he's usually depicted with a sword in one hand and the Dharma, or the scriptures, in the other hand. And the sword is cutting off delusions from the sutras, the teachings. He represents pure and undefiled wisdom. And Manjushri asked the Buddha, how do bodhisattvas get rid of the mind of impurities in order to teach others? Here's a bodhisattva who is the wisest of the bodhisattvas, and he's asking this question of the Buddha. And Samantabhadra Bodhisattva, the bright shining wisdom Bodhisattva, said, in this illusory world, how does one practice? That is, if practice itself is an illusion, how to practice? It's getting at some of the subtle points of our practice. And then the Bodhisattva of universal eyes said, where should mind abide when practicing? And another Bodhisattva said, what is the nature of enlightenment and why are there differences in attainment? And that answer to that Bodhisattva, the Buddha said, be at all times without deluded thoughts arising. So what are these deluded thoughts? How do they arise? And what's the very nature of these thoughts? So to repeat the preface, it says, the manifest koan depends solely on the right now. The absolute manner distinguishes only itself. If you try to set up gradations or intentionally try to strive, then all of this is painting eyebrows on chaos or attaching a handle to a bowl. So how is tranquility achieved? So that's the question. How is tranquility achieved?